The world did not expect a king. It expected a funeral for an empire. When Philip of Macedon was struck down by an assassin's blade, the map of the known world began to tremble. To the north, the tribes sharpened their spears. To the south, the Greek city-states whispered of rebellion. And across the sea, the great king of Persia smiled, believing the Macedonian threat had died with its creator. They all looked at the 20-year-old boy who had just inherited the throne and saw a victim. They saw a child playing with a crown far too heavy for his head. They were wrong. They weren't looking at a victim, they were looking at a storm. Alexander did not wait for the dust of his father's burial to settle. He didn't ask for permission to rule. He took his horse, Bucephalus, a beast so wild no other man could touch it, and he rode. In those early days, the air in the palace was thick with the scent of betrayal. Alexander knew that in the game of kings, the only way to stop a rebellion is to make the very idea of it terrifying. When Thebes rose against him, he didn't just defeat them, he erased them. He burned the city to the ground, leaving only the house of the poet Pindar standing amidst the ash. It was a message written in fire. I am not my father. I am something else. But Greece was a cage, and Alexander's eyes were fixed on the sunrise. To the east lay the Persian Empire, a titan that had loomed over the world for 2 centuries. It was a realm of infinite gold, immortal soldiers, and a king, Darius, who considered himself a god. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander stood on the shores of the Hellespont. He threw his spear into the Asian soil, claiming the entire continent as won by the spear. He wasn't just invading a country, he was challenging reality itself. At the Granicus River, the Persian satraps waited. They had the high ground, the numbers, and the pride. Alexander didn't wait for a tactical opening. He plunged into the water, his white plumes dancing in the wind, a target for every archer on the bank. He nearly died that day. A Persian axe swung toward his skull, a fraction of a second from ending history before it truly began. But a friend's blade intervened, and the tide turned. The Persians didn't just lose, they broke. They had never seen a king fight like a demon. As he marched deeper into the heart of the east, the legend began to outpace the man. In the city of Gordian, there was a knot, an impossible tangle of bark and rope. Legend said that whoever untied it would rule Asia. For centuries, the greatest minds had failed. Alexander didn't waste time looking for the ends of the rope. He drew his sword and hacked through it in a single strike. He wasn't there to follow the rules of the world, he was there to rewrite them. Then came Issus. This was the moment the 2 worlds collided. Darius himself was there, riding a golden chariot, surrounded by his immortals. The sheer scale of the Persian army was enough to suffocate the soul, but Alexander looked at the chaos and saw a path. He didn't attack the army, he attacked the man. He led a wedge of his finest cavalry directly at Darius. Through the blood, through the screams, through the wall of shields, Alexander's eyes stayed locked on the great king. Darius saw the madness in that gaze, the sheer, unrelenting hunger for victory. And for the first time in his life, the King of Kings felt fear. He turned his chariot and fled. The Persian Empire was bleeding, but Alexander was not satisfied with land. He wanted the soul of the world. He moved south to Egypt, where the sands whispered his name. In the desert of Siwa, he trekked to the oracle of Ammon. He walked into the temple a man and walked out a god. The priest declared him the son of Zeus. From that moment, the mission changed. This wasn't a war of conquest anymore, it was a divine crusade. He founded Alexandria, a city of marble and light, a beacon for a world that was becoming one under his shadow. But Darius was gathering one last storm. On the plains of Gaugamela, the Persians prepared a battlefield like no other. They leveled the ground so their scythed chariots could tear the Macedonians to pieces. They brought elephants, mountains of steel, and over 250,000 men. Alexander's generals were terrified. They suggested a night attack, a desperate gamble in the dark. Alexander refused. "I do not steal my victory," he said. That night, while his army trembled, Alexander slept. He slept the deep, peaceful sleep of a man who knew the ending of the story before it was written. When the sun rose, the battle was a nightmare of dust and iron. The Macedonian phalanx, a forest of 6-meter-long sarissas, held the line against the crashing waves of the Persian host. Again, Alexander waited for the crack in the armor. Again, he saw the opening. He led his companion cavalry into the heart of the Persian center, a lightning bolt of bronze and blood. Darius fled again, but this time there was no empire to return to. The crown of the world had shifted. Alexander entered Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis. He sat on the golden throne of Cyrus the Great, but his feet didn't touch the floor. He was too short for the massive seat of the Persians. He burned the palace of Persepolis, a drunken night of fire that signaled the end of the old world. He began to dress in Persian robes. He began to demand that his men prostrate themselves before him. The line between the Macedonian king and the Eastern autocrat began to blur. His friends grew uneasy. They had followed a soldier. They were now serving a deity. The deeper he went into Asia, the more the shadows grew. Paranoia crept into the camp. Plots were discovered, and blood was spilled. Not the blood of enemies, but the blood of the men who had fought beside him since the beginning. He killed Clitus the Black, the man who had saved his life at the Granicus, in a fit of drunken rage. The silence that followed was heavier than any battle. Alexander was becoming the thing he had set out to conquer, a lonely, terrifying power. Still, the horizon called. He crossed the Hindu Kush, mountains that touched the stars. He entered India, a land of monsters and monsoon rains. At the Hydaspes River, he faced King Porus and a wall of war elephants. The battle was a meat grinder. The rain turned the earth to mud, and the screams of the dying were drowned out by the trumpeting of beasts. Alexander won, but the cost was etched into the faces of his veterans. At the banks of the Hyphasis River, the world finally broke. Not Alexander, but his men. They had marched 11,000 miles. They had bled in every climate, fought every horror, and seen every wonder. They wanted to go home. They sat in their tents and wept. For the first time, the king who could command the elements could not command his own people. He stood before them, pleading, raging, promising them the edges of the ocean, but they remained silent. Alexander retreated to his tent, locked himself away, and for 3 days he tasted the bitterness of a dream cut short. He turned back. The march through the Gedrosian desert was a slow-motion tragedy. The sun killed more of his men than the Persians ever had. Thousands perished in the burning sands, their throats parched, their bodies failing. Alexander walked with them. When his scouts found a helmet full of water and offered it to him, he poured it into the sand. If his men could not drink, he would not drink. He was still their king, even as he led them through hell. They returned to Babylon. It was to be the capital of a new world, a place where East and West would fuse into something the sun had never seen before. He was planning new campaigns, to Arabia, to Carthage, to the Pillars of Hercules, but the flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. In the heat of the Babylonian summer, a fever took hold. It wasn't a wound from a spear or an arrow that brought him down, but a quiet, internal fire. For 12 days, the world held its breath. His generals gathered around his bed, their armor clanking softly in the dim light. They asked the question that would determine the fate of millions. To whom do you leave your kingdom? Alexander, the man who had conquered the world before he was 33, looked at them with eyes that had seen the edge of the map. He whispered 3 words: "To the strongest." The moment his breath left his body, the empire began to shatter. The generals who had fought for him now fought each other, tearing the map into bloody pieces. His body was stolen, his heirs were murdered, and the dream of a unified world evaporated like mist. But as the centuries passed, the cities he built remained. The language he spoke became the tongue of the world. The stories of his glory became the blueprint for every conqueror who followed. Alexander didn't just rule. He transformed the DNA of history. He died in a palace in Babylon. But his ghost stayed on the battlefield, forever young, forever charging into the heart of the storm. He had sought immortality, and in the end he found it, not in a long life, but in a name that would never be forgotten as long as men tell stories of the stars. The boy from Macedon had set out to find the end of the world, and instead he became its center.